we had one particular moment, and Sue, who's the executive director of the JDA, she calls it the Cornflake Moment, because it was a son and his mother who came here, and she hadn't had a conversation on the phone probably for years, and he was feeling desperate because he was so worried that he couldn't contact her if he needed to. They couldn't know if she was all right. She couldn't phone them. They were desperate to find a phone that she could hear on, and she hadn't been able to hear any questions that were being asked on the phone, to be able to respond appropriately for so long. And he said, I think it's best if I go in the other room and I ring her, because she'll be more likely to recognise my voice. So we tried a phone with her, and he went into the other room and he rang her, and he said, "What did you have for breakfast?" And she said, "Cornflakes." And she was so, it's a small word and it's a tiny conversation lasting a few seconds. But that cornflake moment was so powerful, because it was the first time in such a long time that she'd heard what the question was and been able to answer it. She had tears rolling down her face, and so did he. And it's just one of those lovely moments, and it really gives the most enormous job satisfaction to know that something relatively simple and something that takes a short space of time can impact so vastly on someone's life. I wanted to mention the fact that not everybody we see here only has a hearing loss. There's a lot of people who have visual difficulties or are blind as well. And the really good thing about particularly a lot of these phones is that they've got large black buttons on a white background, which is very good for people who have visual loss. And also they're large buttons, so it's good for people who perhaps have arthritis, and their manual dexterity is not as good as it was. Also, if somebody is totally blind, as with all phones, there's a sort of nodule on the middle button so that they can feel where the other buttons are. And that's the same with the listening devices. There will be a certain little raised area on each side to indicate, for example, what is a plus as opposed to a minus. So the equipment certainly is accessible for people who have a visual loss as well as a hearing loss. And the support services here don't also only help the BSL users, the people who are purely deaf. Some will be blind as well. For example, we have some who have Usher's syndrome, and people communicate with them with tactile sign language, so they hold their hands and they sign. And there are deaf-blind communicators as well whenever we have a talk. So the services are very much available not only for people with a hearing loss, but for people who are deaf-blind as well. One of the other services that Hearing Connect provides is deaf awareness training. We go into predominantly care homes. We also teach people who do domiciliary visits, and we teach them about communication, about hearing aids, about what it's like to have a hearing loss, how to recognise the sounds of hearing loss. We give them a real sort of 3-hour, very all-round course so that they really have much more of an understanding, because quite often people can't understand why someone doesn't want to wear their hearing aid. So we'll give them hearing aids to wear, we'll put the radio on quite loud and get them all to have a conversation with each other, and within 5 minutes they're desperate to take the hearing aids out because all they can hear is this massive sound. And just experiencing that for themselves gives them a really good understanding of why people don't want to wear them. And we'll tell them all the alternatives, or how to use portable loop systems in conjunction with hearing aids, how hearing aids work. So our deaf awareness training is really a vital part of what we do. What happens when you lose your hearing, particularly when you have age-related hearing loss as an example, and I'm using that as an example because the majority of hearing loss is age-related. What happens is that you lose certain frequencies of sound. You can still hear that people are talking to you, but you can't make out what they're saying because you've lost certain frequencies of words. So it sounds like a fuzz, like a sort of just like a noise. Someone's talking. If you can lip read, it gives you the ability to match what you're hearing to someone's lip shapes, which can help a lot. But what generally is not understood about this hearing loss is that it's not simply a reduction in volume. It's generally assumed that if you lose your hearing, you just can't hear as loudly. But that's not the case. The majority of time, it's the fact that you can't hear as clearly. You can't hear as loudly, but you can't hear as clearly. And that means that what you need is for people to get your attention before they speak to you, make sure that you're looking at them, and then speak clearly and concisely. Shouting doesn't help. If someone doesn't understand what you're saying, then shouting at them is useless. All they're going to see is somebody who actually looks angry and is shouting, and it's going to give them no better understanding of what's being said. In fact, it's counterproductive, because if you're going to be shouted at, you're going to get stressed out and tense. And if you're stressed out and tense, then you're less likely to be able to hear, not more likely. So really what has to be understood is that people need clarity. That's what they lose. So if you slow down a little bit, you don't want to slow down too much, because that destroys the natural rhythm of speech, which you need. You need to get their attention, you need to slow down, and not be worried about writing things down, even keywords down, if you need to, because it can be very frustrating on both sides. And, you know, there are so many... there are a lot of places now which have loop systems. You see them, you see a sort of ear with a T. You see them in post offices and banks, and they're normally in the supermarket. There'll be at least one aisle with a loop. And when somebody puts their hearing aid to the loop setting, it means that the only sound they can hear is the sound coming from the loop microphone, which means you can hear clearly without the disturbance of everything else going on. And that's why it's very difficult to use a hearing aid. So, you know, it can be a big problem if staff aren't trained to use the loop systems that they have. This can happen in theatres, as I said, in banks and post offices, in libraries, all sorts of places. If they have loop systems, they need to be maintained regularly to make sure that they're always working. And they need staff to know how to use them, because they can make an enormous difference to people who wear hearing aids and can't manage otherwise. Undoubtedly, things are better than they were. The gadgets are simple to use. The sound is digital with a lot of these devices now. So a lot of people will say that the clarity is more than they thought possible. There are listening devices which can come, you know, two microphones that are paired. So the person with the hearing loss wears one microphone, and the person that they're talking to wears one. So that can be used in a lecture theatre, or a teacher can wear it, or somebody can go to a restaurant. And, you know, there's quite a large range. I mean, you could hear from the back of the lecture theatre. So that means that if you're wearing one of these devices, which can be in the form of a portable loop, or if you're not a hearing aid wearer, it can be worn just with earbuds or a stetoset or headphones. And it means you can pinpoint what that person's saying. So you could be sitting, you could go to a bar or a pub and actually end up hearing better than the person without the hearing loss, who's struggling to hear you over all the extraneous sound that's there. But you're wearing this device and you're connected to them with this microphone, and all you hear is their voice, you're going to be able to calmly have a conversation, no matter where you are, even if you're in a train station or somewhere where there's masses of noise going on. So technology is discreet. The stigma isn't there so much. Years ago, that was much more of a problem than it is now. Nowadays, everybody's got some sort of gadget hanging off them around their neck or hanging out their ears or something. So actually to have a gadget is the norm. So, you know, for people who sort of might initially think, oh, I don't want to wear that or I don't want to use that. Well, you know, actually most people have got some sort of electronic thing that they're taking around with them all over the place, in the form of an iPod or a phone or whatever it is. So the stigma isn't there. Attitudes to disability have improved. There's a long way to go still, but I would always encourage people who have a hearing loss and who could be helped hugely by using devices such as listening equipment when they're out in public. I would really encourage them to try it and not be worried about being seen with a gadget, because people will know they've got a hearing loss. Because you know, the difference can be the huge difference between being isolated and being part of what's going on, and that changes the quality of your life. The challenges are actually quite often people who don't want to use the devices that exist that can really help. That on a personal level probably would be the biggest challenge. There are phones, there are television listeners, there are support groups, there are discussion groups and book clubs, and certainly, you know, what we hold here. There are devices that isolate sound, as I said, and I think probably, as far as I'm concerned, the biggest challenge would be people who could be helped so much, but are so worried about anyone knowing that they've got a hearing loss, that they don't want to use it, and actually it could make a massive difference. And I've seen people who are able to get past that barrier, and suddenly the confidence just grows so much. And lip reading classes can help with that a lot. Technology will improve, hearing aids improve. Probably, I would say another challenge is the fact that hearing aids are small and fiddly, and people who have arthritis struggle a lot. They are introducing, even on the NHS, remote controls that you do have to pay for, but you can get remote controls which help you to change the settings on your hearing aid. That is an issue. Fitting the hearing aids is hard. People who live on their own and struggle to fit their hearing aids can really suffer because of that. There are alternatives to hearing aids, like the listening devices I mentioned, and sometimes you can get to a point where it's better to use something like that, something you pop in your ears and you turn on and point it to the person you're talking to, can sometimes be better than struggling with hearing aids. That's, you know, and the fact that hearing aids amplify everything. It's not natural sound, it's artificial sound. But one very good thing now is that they have little open moulds for people who have mild hearing loss, and those little open moulds can amplify what you need amplifying, but still let a lot of natural sound in. And that means that you can, if your hearing does worsen, you can gradually acclimatise to that artificial sound, because it's amalgamated with what you're hearing naturally. So, you know, if you do get to a point where it is fully artificial and it's all amplified, you've had so long to get used to that, and you wear hearing aids much, much more successfully than someone who's been very loath to wear them and has denied it and not wanted to, until they really, really, really can't hear very much at all, and then suddenly they put hearing aids in and there's a blast of sound and they hear things that they haven't heard for so long, and it begins to irritate them, the footsteps and the scraping noises of everything, and you know, the rustling of a plastic bag, and all these noises that get amplified by hearing aids that they've not heard for so long, that quite often they find it's sometimes too hard to manage. Hearing Connect and the Technology and Information Centre here is obviously just one department of the JDA. I and my colleague Judith, we tend to deal mainly with people who have lost their hearing. Judith works on a Wednesday, and on a Wednesday we have day centre here for the signers, people who use BSL, British Sign Language, predominantly are born deaf or go deaf at a very young age, and their primary language is sign language. They communicate sign language, some of them don't speak, and we have a support services department here, and the people in the support services department help these BSL users in every aspect of their lives. It's an amazing thing that they do, from going to the dentist, to the doctor, to accessing legal support, to moving home if they need to, every part of their life, going shopping, and they will be with them all whenever they're needed. If you can think about the fact that sometimes they're ill and they won't even understand what's wrong with them. They can go to the doctor and not even understand what they've got. And so somebody from the support services goes with them, explains to them exactly what's wrong. If they have to go into hospital, they'll go and visit them regularly. And they'll be there, even if they die, they'll be there literally with them, taking it in turns all the way to the end. And it's a wonderful, wonderful department. We also have a families department here. Jodie, who works in the families department, will give help to people who will have a baby and they will get told that their baby's deaf, and sometimes they've never even met a deaf person before, and they're faced with the challenge of having to bring one up and they have no idea where to turn or what to do. Jodie will give them the support they need from day one, how to access all sorts of services, how best to access education, what are the best routes to take, what are the options, whether it's right or not. Sometimes people will choose to have their child be fitted with a cochlear implant. Cochlear implants have improved a great deal since the first one. The sound is not natural sound. Electrodes put the sound into the brain rather than it happening naturally. But we are seeing more and more that babies are implanted perhaps at the age of 1, and they succeed at school, in ordinary school, mainstream education, on a par with their peers. And I've seen families with children that Jodie has helped who've gone on to university. I mean, some of them even to do medicine. I mean, nothing is too much of a challenge. There are still deaf families who believe that British Sign Language is their culture, and they don't want to be fixed in inverted commas. They don't want to have that culture taken from them. They would rather communicate in British Sign Language or any other sign language around the world. It's not exclusively here. But others who more and more are turning to their technology that is improving all the time. And I think cochlear implants have improved to the extent where they'll continue to do so. To be honest, eventually they are working on it. Perhaps they'll be able to transplant the hair cells in the inner ear. and perform surgery like that. I think that's that's certainly on the cards for the future, but the support exists for families with children and for babies to really be able to manage. Certainly, if deafness is the main problem, certainly with the right technology, with the right equipment and the right support, to be able to manage along with their peers and on a par with them. If you want to get in touch, my direct number is 020 8446 0214. The number of the JDA main office here is 0208 446 0502. Our website is www.jewishdeaf.org.uk. My email address is info@hearingconnect.org.uk, and you can also look us up on Facebook and on Twitter and on LinkedIn. Just look up Hearing Connect.